Hey, Stephanie. Awesome. Hello, everyone. In case you haven't noticed, this will be our first Instagram Live conscious conversation where we will also have ASL interpretation. I'm super excited about the conversation we are going to have today with a longtime friend, comrade, organizer extraordinaire, Charlene Carruthers. We are going to be, the theme for today's conscious conversation is unapologetic in our truth-telling, organizing, and building solidarity. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes to listen to some jazz and allow for more folks to get in. And then when Charlene gets here, we'll invite them to join. Hello, Darren. Hello, Angel. The other context that I will share is that this is March and we're celebrating Women's History Month. So we'll bring that into the conversation as well. Though here at Can't Stop, Won't Stop, we celebrate women's history every month, but especially in March. Hello, everyone. We will get started shortly. If you have any access needs, feel free to drop it into the chat, and we will do our best to be responsive to those. And I would also just say thank you to the Can't Stop, Won't Stop accessibility coordinators, Melissa and Liang, for working with us to increase access to all of our programs, including things like Instagram Lives. Hello, everyone. See folks coming in. We're going to get started soon. Waiting for Charlene Carruthers, our featured guest in our conscious conversation today. Charlene joining. Get them on. Hey folks, gonna get started soon, trying to get Charlene on here. Yes, Carmen, welcome. Got a little jazz as we're waiting for our comrade Charlene to join. All right, we are working on getting Charlene on, but as we are waiting, maybe I can do an introduction for Charlene. Charlene, in addition to being a friend and a comrade, is a political strategist, a cultural worker, and a PhD student in the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University. A practitioner of telling more complete stories, her research includes Black feminist political economies, abolition of patriarchal and carceral systems, and the role of cultural work within the Black radical tradition. Charlene's work spans more than 15 years of community organizing across racial, gender, and economic justice movements. And as the founding national director of BYP 100, she has worked alongside hundreds of young people, young Black activists in particular, to build a national base of activists in a member-led organization of Black 18 to 35-year-olds. We are now joined by Charlene. Hello, Charlene.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
I was just doing your, sharing your bio. The last piece I'll just share is that Charlene is also the author of the book Unapologetic, a Black, queer, and feminist mandate for radical movements, which is available in English and in Spanish.
Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us, Charlene. Sending you love from DC.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see your face.
Likewise, likewise. As you know, we have ASL interpreter. This is our first conscious conversation with ASL interpretation. So we'll just be mindful of our conversation to ensure that the interpreter is able to keep up with us.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. So for our conversations, Charlene, that we do, we like to start off with a couple of grounding questions, and then maybe we can dig into some more specific questions just based on what I know about your work and our relationship, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first question that I have for you is, who are your people?
Oh, so you're just going to be Ella Baker Jr. tonight, like immediately, like right out the gate. Okay. So, that's Ella Baker's question. Prolific organizer, a leader who helped found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, served as the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, field secretary for the NAACP, on and on and on. There's somebody on here who doesn't know who Ella Baker is, so I just think it's important to give a little bit about who she is, or what was, and what her legacy, and a little bit about her legacy. And she would ask that question, who are your people? And I think why you're asking me that is to get a sense of how I understand myself in the world and who I'm in relationship with. And so my people are people who are the descendants of migrants to Chicago. My paternal and maternal grandmothers both migrated to Chicago from Mississippi. Fires Point and Greenville, Mississippi, respectively. And so I am the descendant of, the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Black people to Chicago over a span of decades. And everything from the way I talk to the food I eat to the way that I build community has everything to do with like the traditions and the culture that my folks brought with them from the South. My people are people who connected to that. My people are people who love food. I love food. I enjoy food from seed to plate. I think about it on all of those levels. My people are people who see themselves as a part of the land that we live on, and not as a separation. My people are people who are intentionally, unintentionally, and curious about participating in work towards collective liberation. And my people are people who binge watch Netflix and Hulu and do what they need to do in order to eke out some sort of respite. Yes, shrimp and broccoli. Yes, Carmen. I do enjoy. My friend Rosa Frier makes this amazing shrimp and broccoli pasta. One of my favorite things to eat. So yeah, that's a little bit about who my people are.
Thank you, Charlene. Definitely appreciate that, and appreciate the grounding in it being a question from Ella Baker too. And thank you for bringing Ella into the space as we are having this conversation. The next question I have for you is, when was the last time that you felt brave?
The last time I felt brave, probably after a therapy session that I had. And then like something that came out of therapy that I like actually took action on. And specifically what I've been working on in my own personal therapy is using my voice. Like that might sound strange to some people, but I actually struggle with using my voice for my own sake, like for the sake of myself. I found myself in many instances using my voice for collective purposes. But when it comes to me expressing my own desires and my own needs, or saying I just don't like something, it's not always easy for me to use my own voice. And so in the past several weeks, that's something I've been in practice with, or practice of doing, is saying what I don't like, saying what I want, saying what I need. And that to me is not a simple thing. It's not a basic thing. It might sound basic for some people. As someone who, comes from, I've had a number of different experiences throughout my life where I have not been encouraged to use my own voice for my own needs. And so to me, that's bravery. It's saying what I need, or saying, I just don't like that. Like saying I don't like something feels like bravery for me.
Wow. So I know that you've been in the midst of being a PhD student at Northwestern University. Do you find, I'm curious in terms of just that reflection of like saying what you feel and saying what you want or like don't want or don't like. Do you find yourself having to do that more within like an academic context, or how has being in academia kind of shed light to that kind of experience or whatnot?
I'm rolling my eyes because so much of the engagement in academia, in my experience, encourages people to move with the head primarily. Encourages people to move with the head and not necessarily our entire bodies, and surely not our hearts. And I mean, that's what I feel like I'm encouraged to do, and what I feel like I'm witnessing from people on a day-to-day basis. And so I tend to be someone who speaks up in class, and it's not, and I find myself in class with other Black feminists who are like, we are going to talk about how this stuff impacts us emotionally. Like it matters. Like as Black feminists, as a Black feminist ethic, caring about like feelings matters. And it doesn't mean that your feelings, determine the course of what should happen, or your feelings reflect what is true and what is factual for everybody. It just it does give an opportunity to tap into one's like fullness as a being, as a person, as a human. So I didn't enter or re-enter academia to find myself or to fully actualize myself. I re-entered academia in order to get some like to read, to study, to engage in conversations with people, and to get some to have space to answer some questions that I have that I'm curious about. And for better or for worse, in this country, being in the academy is one of the few, like being in a formal education setting, whether it's the academy or somewhere else, is one of the few places where I could have the time and resources to dedicate to just to study.
I appreciate that, and I think I also think I know, knowing that before kind of going into that, you've been like a director or an executive of a national nonprofit. I know you founded your own kind of center in Chicago. And so I just wanted to name that I think spaciousness is something that, at least personally, when I had those kinds of roles, didn't necessarily always have. And so I can see, or I feel like I can understand how it would be helpful or important to do that, to kind of further and expand kind of your own thinking and push others too in that context. Oh.
Am I still here? Okay.
Okay, there you are. So Charlene, we mentioned earlier, I mentioned before you got on that, of course, we are in Women's History Month. And, here at Can't Stop, Won't Stop, we celebrate women's history every month, but we know there's a particular moment in March to kind of do it more broadly with folks. And one reflection that I had is, even now, like in as I see kind of racial justice movements and movements overall, I notice there's a lot of women, femmes, queer, non-binary folks who are at the forefront, who are leading these movements, who are on the front lines. And I'm curious if you have a theory or thought on, is there why do you think this is? And any reflections on how we kind of hold that, especially kind of in this political moment that we are in?
Oh, Greg, I don't know why it is. I can think of the how we got to this place, and the importance of recognizing that what's happening right now is the result of decades of work that happened before us. And so maybe that is also a lot of the why. It's because of Black feminists, third world feminists, indigenous feminists, Latinx feminists, Chicana feminists, Asian feminists doing movement building or globally to develop themselves and other people as leaders. And when I say feminist, I don't mean women when I say feminist. Like, I'm not using feminist as a placeholder for women. Like, I really mean people who are intentionally organizing to end all forms of gender-based exploitation and, frankly, all forms of global oppression. And understanding that, like, understanding the importance of a gender analysis in that work, and not just an analysis, but an ethic of care. When I think about feminism, and as a Black feminist, like, I think about an ethic of care. And so I think that our communities and the broader world is demanding an approach to movement building that takes into account care. And to me, that is not gender specific. It's definitely not gender specific. And feminisms broadly, radical feminisms broadly, allow us to, in my view, particularly radical Black feminisms, allow us to tell a more complete story about the conditions of our lives, of the world, that then put us in a better position to develop more complete solutions. And so I think that's what we're witnessing. We're witnessing people, people who come from great traditions of political struggle, claiming space, being recognized, and being valued as leaders. Because these folks have always been in have always served as leaders, and not necessarily, oftentimes have not served as visible or valued strategic leaders in movements. But it's not new for people to be present. I think it's newer and different for the prominence of leadership. But there are limits to, as I'm sure you know, there are limits to representation. That ain't enough. I don't actually really. It doesn't tell me anything about you being a woman leader. Nothing. Actually, doesn't tell me nothing. It doesn't tell me anything about you until I have a better understanding of what you do and how you are with other people. Because that tells me about your values and your politics. Not just what you say, not just what your personal identity is. The Combahee River Collective, and many people, if you haven't read it, the Combahee River Collective statement is what Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs calls sacred text, like a sacred Black feminist text. And in it, they're the first to talk about identity politics. And when they are talking about identity politics, they are talking about how their experiences inform the politics they chose to take up, the political actions they chose to take. And I was talking with Barbara Smith the other day, and she was like, it's like they just took the identity and left the politics. And so holding a marginalized, having a marginalized identification or coming from a group of people who have been marginalized and oppressed doesn't determine what your political values or actions will be. It is a choice that people can or make to engage in public action and also to be in relationship with people in ways that expand our access to dignity, as opposed to engaging in ways that restrict and limit our access to dignity.
Whew. So I want to stay on this thread a little bit, because I think it's an important one, especially kind of given some of our national politics right now. Clearly this last election and the runoff that followed in Georgia, and kind of just even some of the current policy fights that are happening now, there's just been a lot of conversation, I think, about identity, about representation, and, particularly with Kamala Harris being a Black woman, a South Asian woman. And so I'm curious, how would you help people understand the nuance? Because I think because I feel like this is a constant drum I'm trying to beat of look, all skin folk and kinfolk. Just because people share particular identities doesn't necessarily mean they share values, right? And so how, for folks who are feeling excited about seeing more representation, what would you offer them in terms of how, the policies and how we push and organize to ensure the elected officials in the White House and at all levels of government are responsive, center disproportionately impacted and marginalized folks? What kinds of things would you help tell people to help them understand the nuance of representation and identity in that regard?
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg, I think it's important for me to start with the question. Oh, okay, she's Black and South Asian. What else? What else do you know about her? How is her leadership? What do you care about, and how is her leadership going to help you create that? And what about her history or her record tells you that she is going to create the kind of world that you're interested in living in? And some people might answer that question absolutely, I support militarization. I support not having student loan debt canceled. I support I support privatized health care. Some people are absolutely going to say that. And then there are a lot of people who are are unhappy with the status of education, are unhappy with being saddled with student loan debt, are unhappy with how much money we do not have in our communities and how much money is spent in the U.S. military. And so I think it's less important for me to like, throw, let me see, throw, what's the word? Not just throw shade, but throw shit on their glitter when they're excited about this member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, Howard University alum, like all these things that she has that are cultural cues. It doesn't help for me to be like, none of that matters. I actually think that's terrible organizing. I think it's terrible. That's a terrible like way to organize with people. But it's like, okay, we're there. What's next?
Mm-hmm.
What is next? Because I can say representation is not enough, but I think I can do even better work by asking, what is it that you want, and how do you think she's actually going to either help make that happen, or what are the ways that she's going to prevent that from happening based on what she has done in the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes up for me as you say that, and one thing that I feel like I even call upon, at least within folks in the Asian American community, is that in some ways, if certain folks identify with like if you're using that as rationale or as a reason to support, it's actually that for me, it's a reason to even hold that person that much more accountable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially coming from Howard University. How you supposed to be? I mean, but none of these academic institutions are about Black liberation. Let's be clear. The purpose of any academic institution in this world, especially one as old as the one Vice President Harris attended, like it's not to get us all free. Like that's not their mission statement. And so it is especially important. I go to Northwestern. We know they ain't getting nobody free, so I can just say that easily. I'm super clear about that. And so I totally agree with you, Greg. It's like, so you see her as one of your people, then she should be held to a higher level of responsibility for the people who she says that she's there for, and the people that she says, like the communities she says that she belongs to.
Exactly.
Right.
I think that's exactly it. Okay, so I'm gonna to shift this a little bit because I think I want to kind of talk about at least what I've been seeing. So clearly that we've had the mass shootings in Atlanta of 8 folks, including 6 who were Asian women. And I've been intrigued by some of the media response to it. Of course, they talked about the shooter, talked about like sexual addiction, talking about the shooter, and they were able to secure the gun the same day, like hours before doing it. Mm-hmm. And then I've also been hearing a lot about, I've been hearing a lot about anti-Blackness in Asian communities, and trying to lift up some of the tensions between Black and Asian communities. And so I want to talk a little bit about solidarity, because I think despite kind of the media portrayal of some of it, some of the most solidarity I have felt, especially over the last couple of weeks, have been from Black folks, from Indigenous folks, from Latinx folks. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how do you describe the thread or the connection between anti-Asian racism and anti-Black racism?
Well, I'm sure somebody's writing a dissertation on this probably like right now. So I'm like, where do I enter? How do I respond to this question? The first thing I think about is settler colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, and how those two processes of extraction, of mass displacement, of mass violence, what Sylvia Winter, a Jamaican critical theorist, calls a rupture, like literally like a rupture in the ecology, and like in the environment, a rupture in people's everyday lives as well. and what those two things produced. You know, how white Europeans situated themselves to determine what should happen to the rest of the world, in particular white Christian Europeans, white Christian men from Europe. They get real specific because they're like real, like they're specific people who like drove a lot of this stuff. Like it's not out of thin air. They created, you know, they created global systems that center themselves as supreme. When we talk about white supremacy, it's literally about the supremacy of a group of people, and they determine who's white. Like, there are those of us, like Filipinos, y'all probably ain't ever gonna be white. Black people ain't gonna be white. Like, we just, you know, well, that's not happening with some of us. And so the supremacy of a particular group of people, and again, like whiteness, they be playing with that too, and like what it means and what it doesn't mean. And so out of that, this sorting of people, included in that sorting of people, was like how they organize the world. And they organize the world through these ways of thinking and ways of acting, or people might say in the academy, logics. That said that, one, Black people should not be even considered humans. And this whole other set of ideas around Asian people under what some people call Orientalism. And Orientalism ain't even just about Asian people. It's about people from a whole region. It's like some wild, weird ass shit. And the way to talk about people and understand people. And so I have to, because you asked me, like I said, somebody's probably writing a dissertation on this right now. But in order to answer that question, I have to think about these dual systems of oppression that come out of settler colonialism and out of the transatlantic slave trade. And settler colonialism happening globally, for sure, and the ways that the transatlantic slave trade impacted the entire world. So we get to this particular moment in the United States where anti-Asian racism, policies, sentiments, cultural production is happening in the same atmosphere in a country that is absolutely determined who is criminal and who is not criminal through the bodies of Black people. And Asian people have also experienced that in this country. And I don't know all the acts and the laws. I'm sure there are people who do, but I don't know all. I know there are a lot of them. From the Chinese Exclusion Act to other, we know about the concentration camps that Japanese people were placed in, all kinds of mess that has happened here. But what I also know is that there are no Japanese internment camps or Japanese concentration camps without also the displacement of Native people. This is all connected. It's all connected. And so that's how I understand anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism and anti-Asian racism. As connected and related systems of oppression that come out of intentional practices that emerge in the wake of or in the midst of settler colonialism in the U.S. and globally, and also chattel slavery in the U.S. and of course in the entire West, and it's the tremors of it globally.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. In that part of what at least we try to say, some of the work that I do is with the People's Collective for Justice and Liberation, and we had a town hall sometime last year with Dr. Connie Woon from Asian American and Pacific Islander Women Lead, and one thing that they said was anti-Asian racism is made possible by anti-Blackness and anti-humanity, and so
absolutely.
It's in that context that it's that important that we actually build cross-racial solidarity, because the whole point, the whole idea is that white supremacy uses and Asians in this context as a racial wedge to sow division, particularly between Asians and other people of color, but particularly Black folks. And so I think it's important, or one thing that we try to talk about is the work of solidarity and building solidarity is the work to dismantle anti-Asian racism and anti-Black racism and all of these interwoven systems of oppression. From your from your organizing experience or from what you know, like what are examples of how Black and Asian communities have built solidarity, have come together to organize and fight, and or what are offerings or ideas that you may have as folks are kind of grappling with this moment now?
Mm-hmm. I think about the ways that, and I don't have a comprehensive history by any means of Black and Asian solidarity work. I can think of examples for sure of individuals that people oftentimes bring up, like people oftentimes bring up Grace Lee Boggs. I think it's important to note that Grace Lee Boggs was politicized in Chicago before she went to Detroit. You know, it was working alongside and living alongside Black people that had a major impact in how she began to understand the world before she moved to Detroit. And so I think that's an important thing to know. One, because I'm a Chicagoan and we think Chicago like is everything. But two, that there was this Chinese American woman who moved from New York City, where there are plenty of Black people, and goes to the University of Chicago, and it is there where she is confronted with anti-Asian sentiment, and also surrounded by the anti-Blackness of Chicago and its segregation, and that politicizes her. And then she moves to another Midwestern city with a large Black population and engages in a lifetime of organizing and movement building. And so I think Grace Lee Boggs is not just important because she happens to be Chinese American and a Chinese American woman and who like just triple OG, but it's like her practice and her ethic and like living a life of solidarity politically and frankly personally, if we want to be real. Her husband was James Lee Boggs, who was also an organizer in Black, and also an intellectual. They were both intellectuals. In my own work in Chicago, I have not ever done organizing in Chicago that hasn't been multiracial with Black, Asian, Latinx folks, folks from Palestine, folks from South Asia. Like that is how we do our work here.
Mm-hmm.
That's how things are. That's how things are moved. Now people have distinctive groups for sure and spaces for sure. And not every group is radical and actively, working against anti-Blackness. There are people who are. There are absolutely people who are. And so I think while I think it's important to like point to historical examples, I also think it's important to like look at some of the work that's even on the margins of like Black liberation and work that, do y'all call it Asian liberation? Because I ain't never heard that term before, so I don't want to use it if y'all don't use it that way. But,
it depends on who you talk to. It's probably not as widely used as Black liberation is, though.
Okay, cool. Because I don't want to misspeak. But I think about the folks specifically when we're talking about what happened to the group of people, mostly being Asian women who were slaughtered, is that some of the most cutting edge work is happening like in the decriminalization space, in the space advocating to decriminalize sex work, to decriminalize workers, period, to decriminalize migrants and immigrants in this country, to end patriarchal violence. Like, I'm interested in that work. I'm really interested in that work and how people are forming multiracial coalition in those spaces. Because people, I think, are beginning to, not beginning, because this is not new, but people are placing like a much more sophisticated understanding of what's going on. And it's like, actually, criminalization is a major tactic of anti-Blackness and anti-Asian racism, period. Because as you said, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity allows for anti-Asian racism to exist. Well, both of those things, anti-indigeneity or anti-indigenous and anti-Blackness policies, cultures, systems, all that stuff are highly operate through criminalization of people. Like, criminalization is at the core of those things. And we should know that criminalization has everything to do with assuming that people are in the wrong, no matter what they do or don't do. and that they deserve to be punished for it. They deserve to be punished for it. And so the story about this man supposedly being a sex addict, which we know is way more complicated because he comes out of an evangelical community where desiring anything sexual can be considered sexual addiction. And it's not to say that sex addiction doesn't exist, because it does for people. And he has become humanized through the media. Mm-hmm. And he is a human, I want to be clear, but his violence, they've made excuses for his violence because there's an assumed criminal, criminal aspect to those women's lives. And if you are a criminal in this country says you deserve to be punished. And so for them, I wouldn't be surprised if that first police dude who spoke on behalf of the shooter, who was actually like the shooter's spokesperson, believed that those women deserve to be punished.
Mm-hmm. So
they're criminals.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but one of those spokespeople from the sheriff, the local sheriff's office, actually was found having a COVID T-shirt that was an anti-Chinese COVID T-shirt on, and one of their Facebook posts. And so I was like, how interesting that this sheriff's spokesperson is now trying to basically rationalize this murder, this shooter's actions and this violence against these 8 folks, including these Asian women. And clearly there's a connection here around the systems and how law enforcement is used to perpetuate those systems.
Yep.
I think this is a helpful thread to continue, because I know that there's been a lot more talk. I say I'm a student of abolition because I continue to be learning, and there's much more that I know I could learn. And I know that there's people have been throwing out terms like restorative justice or transformative justice. And I'm curious because I think it's coming up now in terms of, I know folks, there are folks who are saying because of this violence, we should increase police and expand the police state. There are folks who are like, no, defund the police still. It's still defund the police and invest in communities, etc. Mm-hmm. How do you talk with folks who think that police is going to bring them more safety, and also recognizing that people are also feeling unsafe, thinking about and how do you help them understand other models of safety? Are there ways that things that you could offer to folks who are maybe newer to this, who maybe could have a sense that police maybe isn't it, but maybe don't necessarily have a sense of what some alternatives could look like? Can you shed some light on what that could look like for folks, especially as I think this is a politicizing moment and an opportunity for folks to kind of expand the nuance of this conversation in particular?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I appreciate you sharing that you are a student of abolition. I think we should all be students if we're interested in living in a world where conflict, harm, and violence are not dealt with primarily through prisons, policing, and punishment. And that is the world that, at least the society that we live in the United States right now. Mm-hmm. Do something, the most common set of actions or the consequences include some sort of punishment. And it continues to be insufficient, and the stuff continues to happen. And so I think it's Miriam Kaba and some other folks who talk about abolition is there's this project called millionexperiments.com. Mm-hmm. And that abolition is 1 million experiments. And for people who are particularly for the people who are I know the police aren't they're not keeping us safe, but what do we do? Well, check out millionexperiments.com. And there are lots of people who are experimenting with abolition right now. And we know there are people who have experimented with abolition of the prison industrial complex before. This is not new. It's new to this level of people talking about it for sure. It is not a new concept by any means. And so I think people should get curious and ask questions. Instead of engaging in conversations with people and just telling them they're wrong, ask questions. Mm-hmm. Well, what does safety look like for you? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel safe right now in your community? What makes you feel unsafe? What would you need in order to feel safe? I don't know too many people who I have met in my life who are in communities that I'm a part of who say the police make me feel safer. They just may not know what the other side of that is. And I don't think there's there's a single solution to that. Like, this is what it should look like. What I know for sure is that what we have right now has not ever worked for communities of people, of oppressed people. And that even if, for example, Derek Chauvin, is that how you pronounce his last name, is found guilty and goes to prison, that does nothing to end the Minneapolis Police Department. It does not bring back George Floyd's life. It does not bring him back. If at best it could bring his family some level of solace, I think that's the best thing that could come out of this. And I think it's unfortunate that our criminal legal system is the only thing that most families, the only recourse that most families even have access to. Mm-hmm. That's an injustice in and of itself. That is an injustice. And so to me, for people who are already like, I'm an abolitionist, I work towards the abolition of the prison industrial complex, it is to be an invitation for other people, to open the doors to the conversation. And this is a moment that is so full of opportunities for people to be curious and to try some stuff. Do some shit. Don't just wait for other people to give you permission to try out something in your community. Consent is a different thing from permission, from people up on high. Of course, you need consent from people in your community to engage them in a project. But there's no arbiter of abolition in the world. I do, though, think that it is important to not co-opt the work. If you are at an academic institution, a corporation, a foundation, or something, a nonprofit with a lot of money, don't just take somebody else's ideas and get a lot of money for it. I'm speaking specifically to regular community folks who don't have access to millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. That's who I'm talking about, trying things out, building collectives, trying projects, and check out. The great thing is that we're in a moment where there's so much information out there. And if people just start to get curious, I think it'll take us a long way.
Yeah, no, Charlene, I say I'm a student of abolition just because I think I actually aspire to be a student in life, because I think that there's a importance of being humble in that there's always something to learn. There's always something that somebody can teach you, no matter their degree, their title, their whatever it may be. There's something to learn, even if it's from the particular engagement or conversation you may have. And then I think, one thing that I've been really thinking about is that it's one thing to say it and to study abolition, but it's another thing to also bring those practices into your own everyday life, right?
Right. That's right.
Even for me, it's okay, well, actually, instead of, maybe how do I actually talk to these people in my life, whether they be family members or people that I know, and if there was harm, or if I inflicted harm, or if there is conflict, what is a way we could actually engage in a process that names the harm that was caused, whether that was by me, you, or other folks in this in this group, and then how could we actually build a community and a process of accountability that actually is able to say, okay, well, this is what we plan to do to be able to avoid harm in the future, and this is what will happen if something like this happens again. And I think and sometimes I think people think it's big and it's grandiose and it has to be shiny with a bow on it. And sometimes it's actually we can start with getting the police out of our own heads.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. out of getting the police out of our own heads and how we are with each other, not policing each other. And to be clear, accountability is not the same as policing, you know? Like, policing is about punishment and surveillance and control. Being in community with other people is about doing what you say you're going to do, or if you can't do it, saying you can't do it. You know, it's not just like doing whatever and just being liberal about everything. It is being in the way that Tanya Lee talks about it, in principle struggle. Mm-hmm. It is taking responsibility for your own actions and responsibility for your own feelings. And us as a community, as communities that we are part of, like creating communities of care for folks. But it's both and. It's not either or. It isn't just show up whenever you feel like it. But hey, if you don't want to be there, let somebody know. Don't just not just let somebody know that you can't do a thing.
Yeah.
Because if we're supposed to be responsible to one another, you know, that actually goes against what the state tells us and how we're supposed to be with each other. It encourages us capitalism, anti-blackness, white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism, transphobia, homophobia. All those things encourage us to not be well with each other. Mm-hmm. Not like, you know, like that's what those things promote.
Yeah. No, the last thing I'll say on this too, because I think, especially in the context of a social media and digital world, I think I get a lot of questions of like, well, this person said this and what they said was harmful and this is this. And my first question is like, well, what is your relationship with that person?
Exactly.
Because I think that this is about relationship. This is about and how we are being in relationship with each other. And so it's one thing to try to like hold somebody accountable, but if you don't know them, if you've actually never met them in person, then that's actually holding them accountable is actually might not even be in the realm of possibility, because if they don't know who you are, like,
what's the incentive? Why should I care? Who are you?
Right, exactly. And so I have to remind people, or at least in my experience, I'm like, that's where it begins. It's about people you know that you are actually in relationship with, and
right there.
And how do you actually improve those relationships and strengthen those relationships and be more vulnerable in those relationships and build accountability and community of care and practice in those relationships. And so, and sometimes that has to be done not online. Like maybe it's via Zoom, because now in a pandemic, we're not necessarily meeting in person in the same way, but it means like having those conversations with folks. I want to say it's Marian Cabo, it's like, how do we turn in on each other? Right? Like actually, even it's in the moments of conflict and in those moments of tension where we, instead of running away, we should actually be like, okay, why is there this tension, and why do we feel this way? To kind of and for me, that is kind of one thing that I'm really trying to like hold is, okay, even when I feel tension and awkward and sometimes confusion, like I'm a human and I will feel these multiple feelings. And how could I, as you said, Tanya Lee said, like to really be in principled struggle, which is an ongoing practice, even with folks that we believe we're close with and are already in good relationships.
Oh yeah.
If anything, it's like that's even more of a practice, right? With folks who are close, that we feel closer to, is like, how do we name that and sharpen and continue to sharpen that? Absolutely.
It's hard, and it can sometimes be harder to do with the people we're closest with.
Whew, Charlene, I'm really appreciating this conversation. If it's okay, I want to just shift a little bit, because I know that we're running out of time, but I want to just talk to you a little bit about you becoming a best-selling author in now multiple languages, and just what the experience has been like. Because I think I'm starting to, I think folks. I'm seeing more folks that I'm in community with, either writing books or releasing their books. So curious if you're willing to share maybe what was a challenge in your process? What was a highlight of the process? And what is maybe something you would share folks who are aspiring to be authors themselves?
For sure. So I definitely took Toni Morrison's call to heart when she said that there's a book that you want to read that hasn't been written yet, then you need to go out and write it. And I felt that, well, not even just, it wasn't just about what I felt. I did research and I could not find a book, especially a contemporary book that was written by a young Black organizer who was also authoring up theory or like intellectual work alongside like the how-to, and one that was feminist, one that was queer, and queer as in like approach, you know, not just like about my personal identity. I actually don't talk much about my personal identity as a queer woman. Like I don't generally talk about that in the book. But like talking about radical LGBTQ or radical queer and trans histories, it didn't exist. And so I decided to make a contribution to that. And so Unapologetic was an opportunity for me to get a lot of the ideas that I had, a lot of the ideas that I had in my mind, like down on paper. It also gave me an opportunity to share stories of my own organizing experiences, some of them, some of my experiences, and also like some historical examples that are oftentimes not talked about as much. For people who want to write a book, do it. Do it. Like, that is absolutely something you don't need to ask for permission. Now, if you, I don't know if anybody watches Queen Sugar, but don't like write a book about your family, airing all your family secrets, and then expect everybody to be okay with it. Like, just like don't write a book about movement, airing people's personal stuff without their consent, and then be surprised when they're not okay with it. So that is not what I'm advocating for. Tell your own story. Tell stories of the things that you were a part of from your own perspective, if that's the kind of book that you want to write. If you want to write a novel, write a novel. You want to write poetry. You want to write a play, do that. I just wrote my first screenplay. I'm going to make my first film.
Yes!
Stuff like that. So there's so many different creative projects that we can engage in, for sure. And so I think that, and there's this book by Courtney Mom that I suggest to everybody. It's called Before and After the Book Deal. It's a really good book to read, I think, for people who want to write books. Before and After the Book Deal by Courtney Mom. Courtney's last name is spelled M-A-U-M. And it just has so much great information. And she was one of my instructors at the 10 House workshop for fiction writers that I did right before the pandemic escalated here in the US and globally. So yeah, I think that like people who organize should totally write books about their experiences, write how-tos. And it's one thing that I talked about in Unapologetic was some of my like things that didn't go so well. Some of what I felt were like my failures. So I don't think it's just about showing, you know, talking about what was all great. It's also talking about struggles that we've been through respectively. I think that's important too.
Thanks, Charlene. I'm super excited, y'all. This is again the book. If you haven't had a copy, it's also now available in paperback too.
Oh yeah.
And it's in Spanish. So
and on audiobook
and
all of those things. I read the audiobook. That's the whole thing.
Oh, okay. That's also good to know. I am a big fan of the authors who also are the voice for their audiobooks. All right. So I normally try to give folks or give people who guest a chance to maybe ask me a question or two. So maybe I'm going to pass the question asking to you to see if there's anything you want to ask me.
Why did you start this series? Why is it important right now?
So I started this series with the idea in mind that there were a lot of people in my life who I believe are doing great work, who are asking questions that they were actively seeking answers to. I felt very privileged and honored to be in community with a lot of these folks because they pushed me. They encouraged, like whether it was indirectly or directly, pushed me to be a better person, a better organizer, a better leader. And that was important to kind of help people learn and understand more of their story, and to feel inspired in the way that I feel inspired by folks, to do the things that each person's doing. So like in this case, to be inspired to write their book, to be inspired to, if they chose to go to get into academia, to be a nonprofit if that's what they wanted. So that's definitely, I think, part of the idea, or why I wanted to start it.
Dope. Thank you for doing it, Greg. For folks who don't know, I mean, I don't know how much tea we supposed to spill, but Greg and I have known each other since early days in DC, when I first moved to DC in 2010. Wow, it's been a decade. It's been over a decade, child. We were a lot more flexible. Maybe I was. I can't speak because you're a dancer. I think what I guess the last question I'll ask for you is that if you had something to tell that Greg in 2010 about what was ahead for Greg as an organizer and for our movement, what would you have told that amazing, still amazing, energetic, badass dancer, organizer, young person?
Ooh, Charlene. So I think I would tell that young Greg that the dancer and artist and creative Greg is just as important as any other part of the Greg, any other aspect of your identity. And in many ways, it's going to be what helps bring people joy and hope and the energy that's needed to imagine those alternate futures that you are trying to help people not only see, build, but also like move collectively towards.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you're still dancing.
Thank you, Charlene. I am so happy that I realized how much joy it made me, and was okay with challenging the notion of like what it meant to be an organizer, to be like doing this work. And it's now like an important part, not only important part of who I am, but like I try to bring dance and embodied movement and soul to everything that I do, because it really is, it does give life and give energy and positive energy in places and times that I don't even realize. And so I'm trying to practice bringing that in more and more.
Awesome.
Wow, thank you for those questions, Charlene. In this final time that we have here, like, are there any asks that you have of folks? Anything that you would encourage or ask folks to take action on?
Yeah. So Raquel Willis has been sharing calls to action against a slew of anti-trans legislation that's happening across the U.S. right now. So follow her on Instagram and Twitter to learn ways to take action. More recently, the state of Arkansas has fucking banned healthcare access for young people who are trans. Like, that's just ridiculous. The other call to action that I have for folks is to check out ways that you can support Mumia Abu-Jamal and the call to free him and all political prisoners, especially in this moment of the global pandemic where he and others are suffering from COVID-19. And then third, go to infobl.org and support the Breathe Act and the work that the Movement for Black Lives is doing. So those are my three things. Follow Raquel Willis and her calls to action for the sake of trans lives and dignity. 2, Mumia Abu-Jamal, supporting him and the freeing of all political prisoners. And 3, go to the Movement for Black Lives, infobl.org, and you can like text or join the list.
Thank you. I love asking that question because people got recommendations for it. And I know that that's one thing they look for in here. Charlene, thank you so much for taking some time. I'm sending so much love and care to you in Chicago, here from DC.
Yeah.
I am grateful we are continuing to be in relationship after more than 10 years. You reminded me we've known each other for more than a decade. And I definitely appreciate this. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of your evening. And thanks for joining us.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.